I'm Linda Shearer, the interim director. I'll direct it at you. The interim director at the Blaffer, and it's my pleasure to welcome you this evening to the talk titled Flex the Mind by Gabriel Lester. His exhibition, Odeon, opens tomorrow at 6 in the museum, and I hope everyone will be there. The exhibition has been organized by the former Jane Dale Owen director and chief curator, Stephen Mattichio, who is now the David L. Butler executive director at the Knoxville Museum of Art in Tennessee. I reached out to Stephen, who conveyed the following thoughts to me. I'm sorry I can't be there for the opening and events, but please do pass along my warmest greetings to all in attendance. It's truly an honor to be organizing his first and long overdue solo museum exhibition in the United States. I first learned of his work in the course of doing research for the Polish Biennial, which you just mentioned, which explored the continuing and evolving presence of phantasmagoria in contemporary art. I hope audiences will enjoy the experiential magic as much as I do. That's Stephen. Deeply conceptual, utilizing an amazing range of media, film, sculpture, architecture, music, performance, design. His work is never didactic, and it's always magical. Gabriel has had an extraordinary career, but as Stephen noted, this is his first solo museum exhibition in the United States. Major funding for this effort is provided by the John R. Eckel Jr. Foundation, the John P. McGovern Foundation, and the Stolburn Family Foundation. Generous support has also been from the Blaffer Art Museum Advisory Board and the Ryan Lee Gallery in New York. We would also like to thank the Dutch Culture USA program by the Consulate General of the Netherlands in New York and the Mondrian Foundation in Amsterdam for the ongoing support that the artist receives from them. And of course, I would like to thank many of whom are not here, the indefatigable staff of the Blaffer Art Museum. So please join me in welcoming Gabriel.
Okay, well, hi all of you tonight. I prepared a presentation for approximately 20 to 40 people. I'm saying this because when the crowd is a bit bigger, and it's fine, I'm really happy you are all here, in a way you can heap more stuff onto people. So I'm not sure if I'm going to go all the way to 117 slides, which I originally intended to. But let's start with the film All Wrong, a fragment.
It works. Sometimes. Sometimes it makes sounds. Just sounds. Look. There's the stereo. This is music I like. I've just come home, you know.
About 20-minute film I made in 2003 and 2004, and this is before the existence of YouTube. And I set myself, I was doing a residency in Stockholm, and I set myself the task to imagine if I could make an entire movie without touching a camera. And it's important to note that there wasn't any YouTube or any other forms of video platforms. So I had to be very inventive. Obviously, when you were saying, oh, white and round candies, I would just simply Google it. There was still Alta Vista, I don't know if you remember this, that had a little video search engine. But once, so when John is waiting for a bus, is you have a person then looking at the watch, and then standing at a bus stop in the bus. That's how John is waiting for a bus. But how would you find Eva was jealous because she felt insecure? So so it was a big challenge to find how I could actually tell the narrative, which I co-wrote with Aaron Schuster, who's a known philosopher, writer who went to Amherst in the US and lives in the Netherlands by now. how to make that, and it's a good start of some of the stuff I'm going to show you today, because I got started in electronic music way back in the 80s, where we didn't have many sampling devices, but we would actually do something like this. Now, for those who don't know what you're looking at, this is a tape loop, so a physical tape loop, which means that an amount of time, sound or music, actually is run through a tape head, and as such is looped. And it was my beginnings as an artist. I come from a background, I'll tell you a bit more about it later, but so I had a lot of art in my background with the art historian mother and the actor, my father, who's now a musician. But my first creative things I'd done were these tape loops. And what is very interesting is that because time is a physical thing when you use a loop like that, is that it also taught me most of the things I started to employ later on when I started thinking about sculpture. So that in fact time and physicality of time, being the 40 seconds that it takes to do this, actually was something I could hold in my hands and say, look guys, I got 40 seconds here. So that was a very interesting start. And the way people would make music in those days, I'll show you, is not only to loop, but also to cut. So not only is time, this is a loop. So this is one piece of time looped, but even better, you can cut it up. And this is how you would make electronic music in the late 80s, early 90s. Have a look. So when I was 16 in the Netherlands, obviously high on pot, this is the only thing I would be doing, cutting together pieces of tape, and it was very gratifying, and like I was saying earlier on, it basically made me into the sculptor that I think I am now. Later on, when the computer took over and you could do this, so every little brick you see here is also a time loop. And this is how a composition for a hip-hop track or a house track or anything digital would look nowadays. So when it went from these tapes, it went to this, and this then becomes almost like architecture. So if you see sometimes how edits look for film or music, it really is like building stacks and a little high-rise there and a little low-rise there and just a silent line. And so just trying to talk about how I came to consider this as a sculptural form. And so my first piece, and actually we're showing like a spin-off, or how do you call it, a franchise of the first ever artwork I made. So I had a neighbor on the other side of the street, and he had the habit of watching TV in the dark, so I would see how the TV lights would amplify the room, and it would get blue and red. And one day I came home and I decided to try and find the channel he was watching on my TV. So I was just trying to figure out, and then when I got it, it synchronized, and I could only see the ceiling and some of the plants. And at that moment, and I just started on a master degree for art. I have not done art school, but I did end up in the Rijksacademy, which is like a residency program in Amsterdam. And I thought, that's going to be my piece. And the reason why I liked it so much is because what I was looking for, and what I still think is very important in my work, is that it functioned like mime does. Like we all know which instrument I'm playing now or what I'm doing, but it's not always the same rifle or the same violin. And the fact that, and this is to do with, there's an element of philosophy, is that in a way what mime does, or when you suggest something that isn't there, you are also in a way catering or supplying the viewer or the people who are imagining the violin, the violin that they desire or the violin that they imagine. So it has a kind of one existential philosopher, German, called Schopenhauer. He has this little line which I like, which says, the world is desire and imagination. And I think that the mime that I was looking for, especially in the early years, was trying to find how can I create desire and imagination and not have to make an image, which is what I saw in my neighbors. So this is how to act, and it's done with the exact same technique that I've made in electronic music. All the lights are on the keyboard, and I'm trying to imagine the film. So I'm really painting. I'm imagining the headlights of a car coming into the lens of the camera, a bit of yellow, it's night, a truck driving by, and it's every single lamp is on a key. So that's how it's made. And that's how it looks. This is the 100 plus lights version. The one I'm showing at the Blaffer is a franchise. It's a different soundtrack. It's only science fiction films. This one, the original How to Act, tries to have a cross-section of cinema. So victory, defeat, horror, terror, love, euphoria, well, and so forth. Whereas the one at Blaffer is very much geared to be just kind of science fiction, but from the 50s on to today. And of course, when you see it like this, it has a kind of James Turrell-esque sensation. And well, like I was saying, I done art school 1 year, and then I went to film school and didn't finish that, and then went to Rijksacademy. And when I did this piece, I've never had to look for work anymore. So this is like more than 25 years ago, and I've been able to live comfortably as an artist ever since. And a nice anecdote maybe is that when it was shown first, it was in Amsterdam, and at the time Marina Abramovic was still living in Amsterdam, and she wouldn't get out from it. So she figured it was light therapy. So she would just sit there, and we had to escort her out. She wasn't particularly loved in Amsterdam at the time. She was quite a tough cookie. Yeah, and there's in the Netherlands, like the whole pot, the smoking of marijuana, it's not so important, but it's funny, it's tolerated, it's not legal. And so people ask me, should people go under? I said, it's tolerated. Yeah? It's not motivated. So I'll skip this one, which is funny because somebody's looking up, and it's one of my films, but we'll get to that later. And I'll tell you a little bit about my upbringing. After this, so you just had the introduction at How to Act, and then it happened. So my dad's from New York City, who is half Irish and half refugee German Jewish, he grew up in New York and in New England, and went to Stanford in the 60s, dropped out, was sent to Brussels, met my mother in Brussels, didn't like Brussels, went to Amsterdam, thought everybody was talking a lot, nothing happened, and then started with a group of friends a cooperative commune. In Holland, very known, there's documentaries and novels about it because they started their own school and they had the first organic granola, and so it was it wasn't about getting high and flying, it was about trying to collectively make the world a better place. And this is where I grew up, and it's completely flat. And I show this image because the village was only 400 people, and I always think that, and it's really the flattest part in the world. I mean, there's some parts in the US, I'm sure, but I always felt like I had so much space to imagine things. So there was just a little bit of reality and just a lot of space to imagine. And then on top of that, my dad, here with the black hat, he was a mime. So they would play in the streets of the nearest city, or in other parts of the Netherlands. And I guess here is the very seed of my desire and imagination thing. They had a sketch where they were both waiting for a bus, and my father would produce an apple, and then they would look at the bus, and then when they were both looking, he would secretly take a bite, and the kids would love it because he would hide the apple. And the thing was that because I was the son, I knew, like, okay, this is not an apple because it's mime and all the kids are seeing something that isn't there, but at the same time I would really crave an apple, so that was what's going on. And at one point, like I was saying, the commune was quite known, and we were followed by an Italian film crew who made documentaries about communes in California and in Norway and in Australia and stuff. And that impressed me tremendously. So here's one of the dentist, my father and his partner. But I was so impressed that I decided, I'm the one with the hat, with the white ribbon, that I decided, well, I'm going to make a film, because that's what I wanted to do. So this is me and my cousins. So they're actually, the two boys are actually the sons of my mother's sister, so my real cousins. And I had decided to make a film, but I didn't have a camera. So I did interviews. So this is a publication I did for a magazine in Lithuania, and it's just me going to all these different people in the commune and interviewing them. And then at the very end, it's difficult to see, it says the end, right? Like a proper film. But there was no film. And but there was in my imagination, and that again, has been part of what I've been doing, making film without a camera. This is a series of photographs I also made in my very early years as an artist, and I went to about 12 different people's living rooms, and this person actually had a red lamp. But I said, okay, I want to see what you have, all the lights you have, and then I photographed all the different existing lights, so I didn't add anything. So in the right top corner is daylight. And what you see, in a way, is that the same space can be this small, intimate place, and it can open up. And I was actually inspired by a textbook on how to light a set for film, and I kind of liked the way it was a sculptural thing. And I did a version of this in Stockholm at one point, and I had I don't know, I think it was a journalist from Turkey who lived there. He said, oh, it's like life. The one moment it's small and the moment it's open. And so he felt it was, he was touched, I guess. And that has resulted in installations that I've shown all over the world, which is called habitat sequence, where I actually create a realistic room with all the stuff you would find in a normal room. Oh, I thought there was a little film, but it isn't. Okay, so it's not a film, but so I make a room in the museum, and I decorate it completely realistic, except all the walls and the ceiling and the floor is black, and that means that, and then I have a sequence of light, about 12 lights, and that lights one little part of a room, much like the picture here, and then another part of the room and another part. And the thing is, because you never get to see the entire room, you're just trying to piece together how that room is. And even if it loops after 12, you're still kind of redefining the architectural space and remapping it and recreating it in your mind. And that's been, like it's been from South Korea to Sao Paulo to, I don't know, lots of places in Europe, but I've been making these black rooms where the lights just change. And it's something that is very rewarding, that it just seems endlessly to recreate a space which you're in, just because the map, in a way, erases itself as it builds itself. I don't know if it makes sense to anyone. Yeah. Oh, here it is. This is Sao Paulo, from two or three different directions or angles. It's not that fast, though. It's more relaxed when you're in the space. So when I followed the track of this is then Buenos Aires. So there's a couple here. This is in the Netherlands. One of the things that I recognized in this early picture is the fact that it has strong moods. That it's a kind of a mood. That certain pictures have a different mood or certain light situations. And I got inspired, or I got interested in making what is called in cinema mood shots. Now, specifically, a genre like film noir has made a lot of employed mood shots in order to tell the narrative. And what you can say is that if you take a film, it can be three things. It can be a story told in images, it can be images telling stories, and can be a combination. And I think when we really regard a film as being very good, it does both. It tells a story in images, but it also has the images tell you stories. And usually, when the images tell stories, they're mood shots. Like everybody knows, what was that Kevin Spacey film where you had that plastic bag drift around? What was it? Huh? American Beauty. That mood shot defined that film somehow, right? So, and I was inspired by that. So I had this piece in Brussels. So I'll show you a few mood projects. This was the daily news. So we would just buy the newspaper in the morning, and then we would twist it. It's also called the news twister, and it would just kind of like be a kind of outside-inside situation, because it felt like a scene you would find on the street, but because of some wind blowing devices, I had this daily newspaper twist for a month. And it's also a choreography or a dance, I would guess. By far my most known piece, if you ever look up my name on Instagram, for instance, almost every second day somebody posts this image. Usually it's like interior designers or mood of the day or whatever. And if you observe well, these curtains or these windows are closed. So I've actually hardened these curtains. So they're lace curtains that sit there forever in a kind of moment of ecstasy. It was actually made in the memory of an artist friend who passed away. In some cultures, the tradition, when somebody dies, you open the window so that the soul can leave the space. And I kind of played with that notion. But it became hugely popular. And so the first print of this was a bit of money, but by the time you buy the sixth, it became an extremely expensive piece. But very much in the line of that mood shot, which I repeated on several accounts. This is in the Sydney Biennial in Australia, where I got a little shack. So I also have an office. I don't know who knows this. I have an office for architectural design, and it's Lester. And sometimes we say, I have some architects that work there, that we could also be known as the office for frozen motion, because this thing, where I stop time, this is too funny, is part of what we do. You'll see a bit of that later. Another early piece, very much related to what I showed you, how electronic music was made, or how music was made when you cut up pieces of reel-to-reel tape. These are poster changers, so they're about 2 meters high. I don't know if you know what 2 meters is, that's about this. And these drawings, they have, so you would find like advertisement on these. They were along this, before we had screens, they would have these posters that would revolve, and you would have, go to Barcelona for a holiday and then get this ointment or whatever. And there's 6 drawings on each of these screens. And the thing is that I made the drawings so they would always connect. Yeah. So that means that there's this endless amount of connecting images. And this is the second year that I was an artist. And so as you noticed with the How to Act piece, it really came from the music and the film. And this also in a way was about editing. I showed it and the journalist said, it reminds me of Sol-Lewitt. My reply was Sol-what? I hadn't heard of him at the time, but by now I have, obviously. And you could just sit there and watch it revolve and create these, sometimes this is a picket fence, and sometimes it's just abstractions or walls or an object in space. But it's quite large, so physically you relate to it quite strongly. That was 99 as well. This is later, this is in London, where it was, this is like 5 or 8 or 7 years ago, I don't know exactly, but when I say this is because of COVID, because everybody's kind of lost 3 years, so I don't know if it was 5 or 7 years, but it was recent. And I designed the seating originally for the museum in a German museum, and yeah, it basically had the same logic. I think there's a video. Oh. Yeah. And this is of course a public piece. So the one in London was also, right in the center of London, and it was a bench, and people could entertain themselves watching this kind of edit. So Jeff Bergman, who's with the gallery that represents me in the US for my work. So this is the kind of work we've been trying to get landed in the US. It's funny to mention that I'm insured for 15 million euros, and America is the only place I can't be insured. So moving on a bit, in the same vein as the piece that you just saw, which is called Sketches of Space, and then has, the red one is called The Adventurer. So, it invites you into an adventure. Something that's become very popular right now is using industrial robots to make art. This is in 2000 when I had a friend of mine, I paid a friend to become educated in how to control a robot. And we traveled to the Alps, and I remember standing there and I said, like, okay, top of the mountain, 4 seconds, and it goes, and the camera would go top of the mountain. And what I discovered was that one of the most alienating things of using a robot arm as a camera arm is that it can have diagonal movements, which our eyes would never do. We don't go diagonally. We go. So, and that was quite alienating. On top of that, there's a sequence in the woods, and it made people, wow, physically sick. So that was quite an experience, because it was first presented in the World Exhibition, like where they have the Eiffel Tower and stuff. But this was in Hanover in Germany, and then in the gallery. And I remember people sitting on the floor and getting. So there's a fragment of that film. So it's really huge when you project it, so it's physical. And what I liked about it is that it feels like one part of landscape is pulling the other and pushing, and so it's also reducing postcard images to basically a reference of space. So it's not about watching the beautiful Alps, it's about, okay, well, we'll have enough reference of depth and space and scale so we can play with it. I think the scene of of the trees is coming next. No, it's not, sorry. I can't control that. So. Here's a more recent device that I've been using, and I've been working with this a lot. This is just an industrial conveyor belt, and this particular brand, sells to cookie factories and stuff, and it has a very slow. And the good thing about these industrial conveyor belts is, well, they don't cost a lot, and they will run forever. And then what I do is I create these landscapes. This is one of the few works I have in the museum collection in the US, or a version of this. I was invited to do this year, and like it's very popular. I like it. It's a bit eye candy because it's like model trains, and it's so, but it works. So you get this kind of landscape. This is where we're still setting up. So this is last year in France, and the one before was in Mauritius in Africa. There's like 7 or 8. Oh, this is just a short thing. There's a lot of museums that have this piece. Like I said, like 7 or 8 museums. And I always get to make a new version. So this is one that was. So the nicest is when you're completely surrounded by it, and then sometimes. So this is in a shop window actually. This one. Whoa! I have no control over the sound. Sorry. So the first piece I did was the light installation, and then the third piece was the one with the poster changes, and in between that came a piece that really was very influential to what I started doing for many years, and that is that I started to consider space as a place that I could edit, almost like every frame, like you see frames of film here or there, that could actually happen to space. And this is before digital photography, so I don't have the best pictures. But what I did is, this is also 99, I guess. Installation art. I built the backdrop of a community center / local pub, and then I just cut it with these very thin slats or thin walls. And you would walk into the museum, and immediately you were in the second lane. And you could go into the lane, and the wall would come closer to you, but once you were close enough, you couldn't see the entirety of the wall. So again, like what I'd done prior to that with the room changing its light, where I was still reliant on having a device switch light where electricity was involved, I all of a sudden discovered that I could also just cut a space with thin pieces of wall and give that experience. And what I was looking for was also that how can I make the sensation of time-based art into a static space, and you as a viewer experience that. And it's the Blaffer that. And as Stephen mentioned in the text that Linda quoted, phantasmagoric also at times. This is the museum in The Hague, known for its soloid and other formal, abstract formal artists. They invited me to one of their main galleries, and the only thing I did is I erected a wall like 60 centimeters from the existing wall, painted it in the same white color. So when you walked in, you had the feeling you walked into the empty space. But as you started walking, much like a picket fence, everything started working, and I'd worked for a month on creating these volumes or these elements. And I think by far my most musical piece. So the little black dots at the same size as the white slats, or how do you call it, shutters, I would say. So the black dots would actually pulsate as you move, and then you have like da da do do do. So I mean, I'm trying to mimic it, but it felt like you were walking into a musical composition almost. And I'm still very proud of this piece, and I wouldn't mind showing it elsewhere. This is now 2002, and it was the first time I had a bad review. Until then, I was always like praised, or they had a lot of good reviews. And so now all my friends are like, yeah, it's not such a good piece. So I had to suffer that. And then I remember very clearly that 2 years later, everybody's like, that was such a good piece. I'll skip through this. This is a mirror maze I made, which is actually a patented mirror maze by an American back in the late 19th century. But that was only 2 years ago, but I'm going to skip that because we have loads of slides. This is an interesting piece also where I'm dealing with the same idea of editing space and creating a time-based experience as an installation form, or also dealing with cinema. And this piece is called The Clock and the Clockwork, and it was in 2003 when, well, most of all Europe and the US, but you know, by initiative of the US, we attacked Iraq. And what I found particularly striking, and that's the analogy with The Clock and the Clockwork, is that we all knew what time it was, but very few of us understood the mechanism. How did that actually, how did we arrive to the moment that we are now? And I wanted to deal with that in the way that I am comfortable dealing with such subjects. So you would come into a room. It wasn't as perfectly decorated as the black rooms or the piece where I cut up earlier. So I didn't intend to make it look hyper-realistic, but I did want you to recognize it as being a room that you either be waiting like a dentist or a doctor or something, but something you recognize, so that what you can read, like the clock, the time. And then the gallerist, and for those of you who were involved, you know, in the early 2000s, you know, what type of art was going on, there were these kind of things like, I don't know, you all know Elmgreen and Drexed, I think, and there's a couple of, these are my, you know, colleagues or peers or contemporaries. There was a kind of playing with power and stuff, and I enjoyed the fact that there was only a button under the desk of the gallery that could open that door, and it would slowly open, and then either close to become something else that looked perfectly in its place. and behind the clock was that mechanism that we didn't understand, or that related, that basically wanted to speak about, well, you know where you are, but behind that this is going on. And it was inspired by a number of things, laboratories in Japan, but also, you know, it's by far not my best piece, but it does show where I was at the moment trying to collect a kind of vocabulary. And I think when I think about the artists that really inspire me are the ones that have their own vocabulary. So it's nice to be in a fashionable vibe where you're either painting in a certain way or dealing with art in a certain way, but when you really find your own voice, and I think this was pivotal for me finding a voice in the way I worked with materials, and the thing was that it now had a maze, but at the height of your hips. So depending on where you were, it either opened itself up or completely closed you in. And I had created little like lines in the table so I could actually edit it. So I didn't know when I went there, the tables had all the possibilities of lines, but I composed it whilst I was there, and it would either lock you in or open you up. And that's something this is the Venice Biennial in 2013, for which we had, you know, one of the four. There were 2 prizes and 2 honorable mentionings, and we got one for this one. And what I did here in this pavilion was, I basically I I didn't do anything other than invite European museums and art institutes to donate a wall. So you're looking at walls that came by train, by truck, by boat, from all kinds of museums in Europe, in order so I could create this kind of playground. Has anybody seen this in 2015? I created, this is next to the Giardini, so this is a brutalist basketball. We rented it with, it was the first combined national pavilion of Cyprus and Lithuania. And the curator, who's one of my closest friends, who's also been one of the curators of the Documenta that I was part of. He and I, we were actually in Kassel in Documenta, and we went here, and then we walked there, and I said, but Raimundus, there's no walls. And he said, well, why don't you bring them? And I said, like, well, why don't I? And I did. And it became a stage also for performance, but it was, obviously it dates back, more than 12 years to a piece like The Clock and the Clockwork. It's Jason Dodge's American artist who put the, I think, wood chips. And so it's a combined piece. This is 2 weeks ago. This is my recent project up for the summer at the Bundeskunsthalle in Germany that have an annual public art piece. So some years before, Karsten Huller did his slide, and Rick Vania did a ping pong table. So they invite artists to do a feature project, and this was my feature project that I opened less than 2 weeks ago. And somebody made fancy footage that I got. It's called The Bouncer. So, as you open the door, you can't go out, so you have to continue. But especially from the side, it's very beautiful how the blue and the red interact, and it has a bit of a Bauhaus history. But most of all, when you had old video programs where they had transitions between one image and the other, you put something on it that went from red to blue. So it's about the transition. Well, fancy stuff. I got this yesterday from the German camera team, so wanted to share it with you. Some stuff I'll show without talking about. This is both entrances to the Busan Biennial in Korea, which was about propaganda, and I made billboards that became so close that they were reduced to, if you pass through this, they were reduced to color and form rather than information. The big piece of the small pieces that you can see from tomorrow onward in the Blaffer Gallery, which obviously is a room that only provides 4 perspectives into it. A piece I did for the Schön Kunsthalle in Frankfurt 3-4 years ago, together with an architecture people that I work with.
We know exactly what you experienced. We know exactly what you experienced.
Is there anyone else involved?
Haven't they told you?
You had no idea.
We know what you know.
We know exactly what you've experienced.
After everything you've seen and heard. Why didn't you figure it out?
This is something that
You had no idea.
Typical for your kind of people.
We didn't know.
You had no idea?
We were misinformed.
So it's the 3rd degree, I guess. It's clear.
Nobody followed you.
It's also about all the refugees and how people get interrogated, and so it's not very explicit. But I wrote this, so there's all these voices that are speaking, but I wrote it so that in very much the same way that I make my art, that it's not didactic or explicit, and it's not about But just by putting sentences in like, oh, we know people like you, you know, by how people get framed or typecasted. Public sculpture, I won't talk about. Big sculpture in Beijing, in China, in 2014. And here you have that element of, you know, the frozen time, of motion, of movement, of time-based sense. This is a public art piece, which has the same logic, I guess. It's on alongside a highway, and half of the cubes are glass, and so the cars pass, but that also makes it a light piece. So there's not a single electronic wire going there, but it appears like a light piece because all the traffic just passes it by. Now we have a sequence of public projects I've done. The University of Stockholm, it's not paper, it's kind of a polycarbonate material, but it feels like somebody just decided to throw their entire thesis up, and it's still there. It's very, very pretty. It's a Korean material. It's not Korean but Hymax, and it has a very soft kind of glow. So it really feels like like a normal piece of paper. It's very nice. And a more recent, this is a public piece, but then out of that came this square I did in Amsterdam. So this is a public square I realized last year. And well, you kind of see how the static edits became these things that, you know, are kind of peeled off, or yeah, they're stages almost, or set designs. Very popular. So lots of people and lots of magazines, but also a really nice place in the city because people really hang out, and I've done some tricks to prevent skateboarding, but BMX people still enjoy going there at night. Public project in a poor neighborhood in London, where I basically wanted to bring a kind of group of aliens, kind of either walking like this, or they're bent in three ways, and they appear like it's called Trek, but they appear like a kind of a group of foreigners or a group of people from somewhere else passing through, but at the same time, of course, it's very much, you know, designed so that people can play with it and interact with it, so you see it. It's also still there in London. Big project in the Netherlands, up for 2 years, where they asked, so this is my studio, this is Polly Lester. So I have 3 entities, Gabriel Lester, Polly Lester, and Lester Film. And here they wanted me to make a city stage. They were going to do a big real estate development next to the central station of Utrecht. And they wanted it to become a stage. And the interesting thing is that the people inside now become like almost the focal point, and you become like the actor in the spotlight, whereas if you're inside, the world is tainted, and the world becomes either orange or blue. So you have that. Yeah, this is some more sculptural work from recently. Another work in China. I've lived in Shanghai for 4 years because my wife's an architect. So she was asked to set up an office there, and we went there. This is in the Stephen Hall building, and believe it or not, he used these carbon plates in a museum in Nanjing, and you'd think, oh, well, these carbon plates are probably made in China, right? But they came from Israel. And Stephen wasn't amused. I thought that was very unsportive, because I'm a big admirer of Vito Acconci. I think we have a lot of similarities in the way we think and work. So I thought, oh, Stephen is going to get it. But he wasn't amused that I used his plates. I basically said, oh, I want the same material. Can we do my piece with the same material? I thought that was fun. There's a good joke, there's an intermezzo, where there's a biennial in the Baltics, and all the foreign artists, they get like a buddy, which is a local artist. And there's an artist called Darius Miksis. He did actually, for Performa in New York, he did the parents' meetings of artists. So he had all the artist parents meet, so he has that kind of ideas. And Darius was paired, or the buddy of an elderly British artist, I forget his name, and he heard the story that Napoleon came to Lithuania and said, oh, I want to take that church and take every stone and then rebuild it in France. That was Napoleon's. And it's a big story because it didn't happen and everything. So the British artist was inspired and said, okay, I want to place an ad in the newspaper so that everybody brings a brick to the museum for the biennial, or it's a triennial actually, and then this brick will be the artwork and then the whole story. And then Darius turned to him, let's call him Peter, and he said, you know what, Peter, I like this idea, I'm going to do the same. And he did. So there were two piles of rocks. It was so funny. I thought that was hilarious. Yeah, so here it's a piece as a sculpture, and then later on it's an exhibition design. So now it crosses over from Gabriel Lester to Polly Lester, where this is a design museum that asked me to do the scenography, and it just, the same idea then repeats itself. And the transition that this has, or going through, it's quite, there's a reason why I have this slide in the presentation, is because if you enter from one side of the gallery, it seems to be a door. And only when you go through the door, you actually are born into the world. You're actually in the center, almost you know, as if there's a big bang and you come to the epicenter of it as you come through the door into the world. So that's something, it's quite a beautiful experience. And then later on, I did this piece, also in memory of my mother, who passed away quite young, and she was a literature historian and an art historian, and she was really an inspiration and a very funny woman. And I remember waking up, and she had died, and I wasn't in the same city. I was in New York, actually, and I walked to the window. I was living in Brooklyn, and I looked outside, and there was everything was the same, but I wasn't, and that was a really weird sense I had. So when I was asked to propose, I did 3 pieces for Documenta in 2013 or 12, I forget. And so one of the pieces was, I proposed to do a transition where you would actually walk in from one side, and you would go to a part that would be completely dark, and then you would come out again, but you would come out facing the exact opposite direction that you went in. And the original idea, when I sketched it first, it was just simply that in film you have a fade to black, and then boom, we're in Paris, right? Or on the stage you have a fade to black, and then the set changes. But by the time I did the piece, I had that experience, and it has a lot of, like, I had done one of my biggest museum shows the year before, so, and my intention at the time was, for the museum show, I'm going to make the best show I ever made, and it wasn't. It was a good show, but it wasn't the best show. And then, since my mom was an art historian, I was pulled to Documenta at the age of 8. So I immediately thought, like, I'm not going to make my best piece. Let's not do that. Let's make the piece that I have always wanted to make, because I had already sketched this years before. And I'm very happy I did, because it has all these different qualities. You actually you go into the eye. You are in the lens almost, or in the, it's as if you're inside of a camera. It's a beautiful appearance, the way it's almost like a large animal. Of course, the donut is another joke that I have not. And then one of my friends says, you go in thinking there will be a twist, and you come out realizing the twist is in you. And Carolyn, the curator of documentaries, said, like, that object of yours that spits out people. So I think all of these are compliments. And so, yeah, this is the, this is lost. This is last summer when I directed my first feature film, which isn't out yet, so it's waiting to be accepted to a festival as it goes. And it's the last chapter of what I'll show you today, and it's some of my film-based projects. I studied cinema, and I really wanted to be a filmmaker, but I kind of became an artist because I had a period where I was on welfare or I had like shitty jobs, and the art world embraced me to a degree that it really also provided me with means to live and you know, what you call a career. So I kind of strayed away from cinema for a while, and then it started to seep back in way after all these installations and lots more. So if you see my website, you'll see how prolific I've been, which comes from the days that I grew up in that village where the only way I felt safe was when I made stuff. And so it's not that, sometimes artists, I guess, make a lot because they really want everybody to see a lot or because they have a lot to say. For me, it's that it provides me with an opportunity to create worlds that I feel safe in. So when I'm on my next job, I'm always safer than when I'm on no job, right, in my emotions. And so this is like, what I did here is I built sets that had the exact same dimensions as this new museum, that was the first opening of this museum. This is again in Sweden. And I had people watch something out of view, but then it felt like they were watching the person on the other side. And for those of you who have seen a lot of films, it actually is a quote from Jacques Tati's film Playtime. And the interesting thing is that because the sizes are identical to the people observing it, so it feels like the people are real, you get that weird sensation of watching people who are watching each other. But one of the first film-related artworks I did, I guess, where I worked with actors. So a lot of films that I've made are in one set, in one place. This is about a lottery. In the Netherlands, invented the lottery, so it was easy to get funding. But that's a joke. But it was very fascinating. And the interesting thing about lotteries, the whole film is the Big Bang, and I showed it with Ryan Lee at one point. Is that when you stage a lottery, you create a drama because there's winners, there's losers, there's suspense, there's, you know, you're waiting for something, there's twists, but the actual thing that happens is 7943887B or something like that. So the actual subject of all these intrigues and suspense is a series of numbers, and as the lottery progresses, you know, the amount of losers increases and the people that have a chance to win, you know, decreases. So it's a very interesting thing, and I think I used it as a metaphor. But like I was saying, I made a lot of films where the people are stuck in they're stuck in a world. Or so my very first film that went to festivals is The Last Smoking Flight, and it's just people smoking in an airplane. And I don't think I have a fragment of it here. It's by far one of my best films. I mean, it's so interesting to see people who are basically observing something in their mind. And you know, when you watch people on the street, you have people that are in the outside world, and you have people that aren't, you know, that are in their inside world. And it was directed to give you a sight into the inside of other people's experience of looking inside, something like that. This I did in Moscow. They asked me to do this performance. I did a similar performance like this in China, and I had the theory that like we only get to see the products, but we don't get to see the people that make things, which is very common if you're in China, right? Then the Moscow Biennial wanted me to stage the same piece, and I said to the curators, I said, okay, this is 2016. I said, okay, cool. But then let me do a film in the hours before the biennial opens. And I worked together with a Moscow-based theater company called Theater Doc that made a film called Berlusputin. It's Berlusconi in Putin's body. They were a very political group and very nice to work with, but the film was never shown in the biennial. It was only shot there and then smuggled out, so to speak. And what it is, it's a farce about, in a way, how many cultures want to enjoy the fruits of art or of culture, but they don't really want to water the roots. And so it's a story between a conformist, a revolutionary, a coward, and a joker. And I'll show you a little piece of it because it's pretty.
Отправили сюда. Ты должен понимать какое-то привилегированное положение. Не сопротивляйся, доверяй.
То есть ты считаешь, что это нормально, да? Тебя пичкают едой, она вылезает у тебя обратно, тебя снова пичкают этой едой.
Пожалуйста, сконцентрируйся.
Зачем жить только по одному стандарту? Слушай, это деградация. Так мы отдалимся от себя окончательно.
Пессимизм – это вероломное отрицание наших ценностей. Мы защищаем наши традиции, а не эту мишуру. Зачем провоцировать? Лучше промолчать. Кто нас слышит? Мы что, тут в прямом эфире на Первом канале, да?
Yeah, it's about 10 minutes. It's funny because I did a lot of research and so Russian people are like, how do you know all these things? One of their ministers, who's apparently a terrible guy, likes to quote Allen Ginsberg. So there's Allen Ginsberg quotes in Russian. So it was quite the idea about the kind of a barbaristic relationship to culture. I'll skip this one. I don't know where we're now. Thelonious Monk, the jazz pianist, his best friend was Pannonica Rothschild the Koningswater, and they had a friendship that I found remarkably interesting. She was a patron to the jazz in the US, mostly the bebop. So Charlie Parker died in her apartment. Monk and his family lived in her house in Weehawken for 12 years. And what she did, she had a Bentley and she would drive around New York and then, pay medical costs for one musician or, pay for a new trumpet for another musician. So she was very loved and interesting woman, and many songs have been dedicated to her. And what she did is she collected wishes from all the jazz musicians. So for those who know jazz, Miles Davis to, of course, John Coltrane and all the famous ones, but also all the ones, the lesser known bass players or drummers. And this book was published, and I bought it in Strand in New York, and it's called Three Wishes, and it's a thick book. And I was reading it, and what struck me was that, and these are all musicians, I like jazz a lot, what struck me was that everybody just wants the same thing. They just want to have a happy family, a healthy life, and the opportunity to play their music. And, and some of these people are like giants to me, you know, like somebody like Coltrane would be. And I'm like, ah, yeah, but that's it. That's the only thing. And it inspired me to make a film about the friendship between this woman and this man. My mother being a European intellectual, like Bononica was, who married an American musician. My father was an actor and a musician, so I guess there was a connection there. And it came out last year, and it did some festivals, and it does well. And I think this is the trailer, and I don't think I've made it big enough, but I forgot to extend it. You can have it's a trailer.
This week, we are doing our tribute to Nika de Koningswater, or known as the Jazz Baroness.
If you had 3 wishes to be instantly granted, what would you wish for? Gazing out across the river at the New York skyline, you replied, to be successful musically, to have a happy family, and looking at me, to have a crazy friend like you. But Thelonious, I replied, you have those already.
She was named after a butterfly. Her father was an entomologist, so just so you know. So this is the end of my talk. I can show you the unfinished trailer to my feature film if you're still up for a 2-minute. It's very exciting. You want to see that? And then I'll tell you what it's about, because it's too exciting now. It needs to calm down, but you have a look.
Where's Darius? We need to keep moving.
I miss my boys.
How old are they?
8 and 2.
You left a 2-year-old child alone?
Child? What? No. Charlie. Charlie is a German shepherd. Do you have dogs?
No.
Why? Why would you eat like this?
Like what?
You told her.
Of course not. No, not at all.
It's just me, no one else. Hey, staring ahead. Out. Remember their faces. It's not what you think. Think stuff. Flying glass splinters. Blood. Stop.
It's a film. I'll tell you about it, and then we have some questions if there are any. But I was in New Zealand, and I opened a book, and I saw these 4 Maori musicians in the British Army, and they are, of course, people of color. And I went like, jazz. And I said, oh no, they're soldiers. And then I thought, oh, that's interesting. If I make a movie where they're soldiers but they carry instruments, then you always have that moment of being like, what am I looking at? So at first I started writing a Western, because I thought that would be cool with a horse and stuff. And then I came up with the idea, and it's a parable, so it's not set anywhere, but you could say it would be possible in Yugoslavia in the 90s, that you have Central Command say like, okay, we're with an entire group of international soldiers, why don't we get the best musicians of each of these countries to parade and do soft power? And that's what happens. It's a group of army musicians from all kinds of countries, and they have their flags, so the British, and there's Dutch, and there's Lithuanian, and there's, what else, French. And the parade is attacked, so they're obviously not in friendly territory, and they flee into the forest, and they leave one of their mates behind, which is not, it's not a crime in war, but it's definitely not something you would do. You basically go back for your, for your comrades or mates or whatever. And so they leave somebody behind, two of them, but they don't tell the others that they meet while the group kind of gathers in the forest, or they find each other. And so they carry a secret, and at the same time they have to collaborate together in order to survive, and it turns out they can't. So you could also call it like the parable of collective failure. So it's like, and it also says like when you have a regime, whether it is music or army, then people can kind of find their place. But once you let go, people will say like, well, me first. So that's the film is of course about the kind of inability to care for others if you're most concerned with your own survival. And then they get caught at the very end, and they play beautifully, and a lot happens in between. So thank you. Questions? Well, I mean, at different points in time, I have had different explanations. I mean, one of the things, I'm finishing a book which is called Cinema Without Camera. And earlier today, when I went to the Blaffer, I was in an Uber, and the driver was like, oh, what are you doing? And you painter, you sculptor, that's usually the questions you get. And I said, well, no, actually I studied cinema, and I discovered that you don't need to have a camera, and you can just do sound and light, or you can do makeup and I don't know, decor or stage, and that's what I did. I kind of like exploded it, and then took parts that I felt that would work. And the fact is that cinema is such a, all time-based media are conditioning. And what I mean with that is that when you observe a sculpture or painting, of course it does a lot of conditioning also, and especially if you know about it. But what music and writing and cinema and theater and dance do is that when they show you something, so for instance in music, if you have like da 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 da, and then do 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 do, then the second time da 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 da, it's yours, because you say, oh, that I know, this is already part of me because I heard it, and so it actually tracks back to your relation. And I like that a lot in the works that I make, that in a way it tries to introduce you to something that you own very, very, you start to feel intimately related to, or it becomes part of of who you are whilst you're experiencing. So I think that would be a way to speak about it. What I also think, I mean, Linda said it like, I mean, one of the reasons I've done 26 biennials or something like that, is that I'm always invited because there's something, I've come up with something new. If you read my bio, it says Gabriel Lester is an inventor and then artist. And because that's it. And people ask me, what do you invent? And I say, well, mostly art, you know. But I've invented other things, but mostly art. So I'm popular in that way, but it's terrible for a collector, because if you pass by a work of mine, it's like, is this a Lester? It's impossible. It's like, it could be anything. At the same time, you know, to simplify things, there's a beautiful practice in art where you have a vertical practice, where you basically go to the essence of the work, or to an idea, like a Donald Judd, right? That basically travels towards, or a Saul Lewitt, or Daniel Buren, or something. And it's simplifying, so we can debate this, but it's very much trying to go deeper into a certain idea or subject materiality. Then there's the horizontal practice, which is like Bruce Nauman or David Bowie, right? So you do this, and then David Bowie is a great example. You know, if you accept me calling him an artist, it's like actor. Then he does like his fashion, poetry, painting, and he has like an appearance as one personality. Then he goes and starts a country and western band with one of the former Beatles, and then he does a funky thing, and then he works with. And that's, I've always thought, oh, that's the artist I want to be. Kind of, that doesn't mean you don't delve deeper into certain materials or subjects, but it's the big pleasure lies in the reinvention of the possibilities that your imagination has, you know. And that's, so I'm a big Bruce Nauman fan, for instance, or for I think Pierre Weave, the French artist who's represented in the US by, I guess, Werner or something. Is somebody whose vocabulary I really admire, and the fact that he has that succession of reinventions.
So speaking of that, in the Blaffer, there's works that you have, you're showing that then you have kept working on, reinvented your own works. How do you get, how do you know when something's done, or is there always just an avenue to reinvent?
Well, like for instance, How to Act, the piece that you saw there. When I showed it first, it was in the Rijksacademy, so this is an artist residency program. Then it was Art Basel's statement, which is one of the Art Basel subcategories where they have solo presentations of up-and-coming artists. And then it went to Istanbul or something like that. And then I remember the gallery I was working with at the time, he said, like, oh, you got to make more of those. And my answer was like, no, but it was good. I mean, why? Why more? This is the one. And then, yeah, I did a very fun piece. So then, yeah, it resurfaces, but not immediately. It has to kind of, I did for Performa in New York, I did in the Abrams Theater, which is an off-Broadway theater. I did a stage size like this. I did the set design, and then no actors, only light and sound. And so you would sit there for an hour, and you would have like light, feel like some shadow would pass, and then it was a Frankenstein kind of take on Frankenstein. So the machine, kind of an idea about the machine you were watching and the monster it created, and blah blah blah. It was very well reviewed, but I didn't think it was very good. It was very very chaotic. And so then it resurfaced there, and then. Yeah, and then sometimes it just, and when Stephen invited me, he said, well, we do a mini survey, and then I said, well, we have to bring the piece then. And then I added just a new soundtrack, but it's the same piece. Yeah, so it's not a new piece. It just sounds new, but looks the same. Yeah.
Could you explain why you titled the exhibition Odeon?
Well, Odeon is a Greek word for basically a place for singing and dancing. So there's a piece with dancers. You'll see tomorrow. A new piece I'm very pleased with because it happened the past days. Yeah, I like these marquee kind of titles. I did Roxy in a big show. In my first solo show in China was Roxy. And yeah, and I'll do Alhambra, and I like these. Doesn't Odeon sound like a place where anything could happen, or where you know, it's an exciting title. I know. Yeah. And like, it also looks good, don't you think, Tony? Oh, there you go. Tony made all the great stuff on the design and this. You had a question.
It's more of a comment, but maybe it was a question. So you started off the presentation talking about music and that you had the idea that you were making music. And so there's like a voyeuristic element to your work, as if the spaces you're creating and you're activating, you're sort of present, as in you create the space, but you're not physically present, as if you're kind of watching people move in the space and interact with certain things. And I wonder if you can speak about that impetus to sort of observe, but also entice people to act a certain way in the spaces that you create.
And you would say that you think my role might be a voyeuristic role, or the people in the space.
Voyeuristic is sort of like I want to see how people act in the space, or I want to listen to people to act. But once they get there, they're going to be inspired to act in their own way. But yet you're sort of conducting, orchestrating that behavior, that action within the spaces you're creating, almost as if, you know, my track is playing in the club, how people are acting.
Yeah.
Or my performance is at the Odeon, how are the actors and actresses and the thespians moving in this sort of track that you set up?
Yeah. Well, it's different from performing music, where you really get, or playing it from a track where you really get to observe while you're idle, while the track is spinning. And I'm not that present in the space. What I do think is that a lot of the early works are devices of viewing. So I haven't shown this, but I've done some large, weird tentacles that are periscopes that have you watch something here that actually happens behind you. And way back in when cinema was invented, and I'm talking like in the 10th and 20s of the 20th century, there was a writer in Vienna, and he said, "Oh, we're not seeing through the eye of the camera. The camera is taking our eyes to bring it to what it wants us to see." It's a slight difference, but I found that interesting, and I do think that especially when I was doing these spatial installations, I was thinking about how do I guide the eyes of the spectator. So yeah, that was definitely there. And that's still the thing. I mean, and everybody knows this, that when they showed film for the first time and the train came towards the audience, everybody ducked and jumped away because they thought it might run out of the screen. But we have evolved now to a point that if the middle point is where you see a telephone and you hear the ringing, and then you watch out the window and you hear somebody talking, you know, oh, that's the person that picked up the phone. You don't have to see the person anymore because that connection was made by the editing. But we're advanced to a point now through TikTok and social media and everything that, and I don't think I have a perfect example, but we can connect dots where nobody would have imagined we could 50 years ago between what an image tells us and what we read out of it, right? And that is fascinating. I did a very stupid experiment in my times back in the late 90s, where I had a little light in a dark room, and it just pulsed, and the sound of a mouse. And then, and it wasn't not a show, but it was kind of a funny thing I did. And I would ask people, what did you see? They said, a mouse. I said, why? And the only reason they thought it was a mouse because it was tiny and they heard it. And so if it would have been a large thing, it wouldn't have matched, you know. But because the size and the sound matched, then it had to be a mouse. But it was a light. And people, what, did the mouse have a light? Yeah, a light. Ah, couldn't have been a mouse. Ah, right. So that's how it's playful to connect, to kind of tamper with the way we connect dots. It's interesting to me.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.